Shalom, beloved. I am Elijah. Today I am presenting another edition of Gems of Truth. Today we are going to look at the story of Elijah in the book of 1 Kings chapter 17. The 1 Kings chapter 17 was a situation when there was famine in Israel, and that proclamation was brought by Elijah himself. Immediately Elijah made the proclamation to Ahab. The Lord instructed Elijah to go to Brook Cherith, and we see how God provided for Elijah. At Brook Cherith, God told Elijah to drink from the brook. God said that he had commanded the ravens to bring food for Elijah. And at a particular time, the brook dried. And the Lord instructed Elijah to go to the village of Zarephath. There, God instructed a woman to feed him. Now, in this story of Elijah, I want us to consider the topic, the source and the means of God's provision. From the story of Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17, there are two things that stand out clearly. One is that God is the source of provision, and God uses means or channels to provide for us. How is that so? 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 4, God instructed Elijah to go to Brook Cherith. And there God said he had commanded the ravens to feed him. Now, who commanded the ravens? It was God. What fed Elijah? The ravens. Where did Elijah drink from? The brook. Secondly, 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 7, the Bible tells us that the brook dried, and Elijah was instructed by the Lord to go to Zarephath. There at Zarephath, the village, God said that he had commanded, or he had instructed a woman to feed him. So the person from whom the command came from, that is God, he is the source of provision. The birds, the brook, and the woman that God used are the channels. We must understand that in life, God is the source of all provision. And what we do, the people around us and the places, could just be means that God can use to take care of our needs. So the first thing is the means of God's provision is dynamic. Secondly, the means of God's provision can happen for a season, and in some cases, in fact in most cases, the means of God's provision happens also for a reason. The third thing is the means of God's provision is dynamic because God does not want us to idolize places, people, and circumstances. Now I'm going to explain some of these things. The first one is the means of God's provision is dynamic. This means that it changes. We see how God fed Elijah from Brook Cherith. After Brook Cherith had dried up, God instructed him to go to Zarephath, and there God used a poor widow to feed him. And this is the case for most of us. Many times, in many ways, there are times, God would change the means of our provision, but he is the source and he remains the same. He does not change. So because he does not change, that is why we need to look up to him for what we need, and we don't need to look up unto men for what we need. So the means can change. We must understand that God is our source and he remains unchanged. God does not change. His resources do not deplete. He does not forget about us. However, you must understand that in the way God provides for us is quite different from how we are thinking or the way we want the provision to come. Sometimes God can provide for us like how he provided for Elijah at Brook Cherith, where he caused the brook to supply him water to drink, and he caused the ravens to give him food to eat. After that, the brook dried up and God moved him to another place. Because of this, that is why we don't need to idolize people. We don't need to idolize places. We don't need to idolize our jobs. We don't need to idolize anything around us, because the means of God's provision is dynamic. Today, God can use job A to provide for you, but at another time, God can use another job to provide for your needs. So we don't need to hook up and hold on to certain jobs, to certain people, to certain things, looking up onto them, or looking up onto those things as if they are the source of our livelihood. No, they are not the source of our livelihood. Your job is not the source of your livelihood. Your business is not the source of your livelihood. Your parents are not the source of your livelihood. Your guardians, your uncles, your aunts, they are not the source of your livelihood. Who is the source of your livelihood? Yes, the source of your livelihood is God. Today, God may use your mother to take care of you. Today, God may use your parents to take care of your school fees. But it could be for a season, and at another time in your life, God could choose to use your uncle. God could choose to use somebody from afar to take care of your school fees. So we need to understand the dynamism that surrounds the provision of God. And like I said also, a related point to this is that the means of God's provision comes for a season and for a reason. There are times in our lives, because of where God is taking us to, because of his plan for our lives, it shapes us in a particular way so that we can trust him fully, wholly, and totally. So sometimes God will expose us to some faith situation wherein the situation will permit us to believe him as the source, as the fountain of everything that we need in this life. So at a time in your life, at a particular time in your life, you may have people who will provide certain physical needs for you for that season. But that year may pass, that time may pass, and another phase may open in your life wherein God may want to use some other people. But if you keep your eyes only on that man, that woman, those people, that job, that business, then you begin to idolize those things. And unfortunately, there are many times the brook had already dried up, the rain had stopped falling without us knowing, because we don't look up unto God. We look up onto what we can do. We look up onto the people we know. We look up onto all of those things, and that is not what it should be, because God demonstrated this through the life of Elijah. The Bible says the brook dried up because the rain had stopped falling. Are you in a place where the rain had already stopped falling? Are you in a place where the brook has dried up? Are you in a place where the ravens are not bringing the food anymore? It could be that God has closed that season of your life, but you need to look up unto him for you to know the next phase that he has opened up unto you. Look up unto the Lord as the source of provision, and whatever thing that you are, be it your job, be it your parent, be it your husband, be it your wife, and be it your whosoever and whatever, understand this, that anything and anyone could just be a means or a channel of God's provision, and the source is God himself. So trust the Lord for all things and never rely on the means of God's provision. Rather, put your trust in God himself, who is the source of every provision that we need in this life.